One of the beauties of hosting your Laravel app on Heroku is that its dyno approach means that you can quickly horizontal scale, add more resources, whether that be because of the amount of web requests that you're dealing with or the amount of jobs that your background workers are dealing with. I had that problem last week when a customer support request came in. They were using Category Merchandiser, where we're managing over, I think, 600 categories for different merchants now. And we've got a sort of a scheduled event that happens a couple of times a day where we go and kind of merchandise every category all over again, just to make sure that we're in the right order, reflecting all the latest stock and sale values, etc. So they were actually kind of using the admin to drag and drop. If I kind of switch over to a browser share, so they'd re-merchandise their products, were saving them, and then they just happened to be doing this at a time where there was a cron process running to re-merchandise every store's categories. And so kind of naturally it's just kind of getting buffered up into the queue. It was sort of the peak situation from my app. Eventually the products were shown, but it was too slow from a customer perspective. So today, just going to break down what I've done this week to try and tackle this, and give you a little insight how you can go about scaling your app on Heroku if you're using Laravel Queues or Laravel Horizon. So first off, I'll show you New Relic, where right now we have the scheduled job at 1 o'clock in the morning and in the afternoon every day to kind of merchandise all categories all at once. Now, you can see that takes, so around 1 o'clock here, almost half an hour to go through every category, fetching all products, ranking them, and sending the new sort orders back. That's what the process that it needs to go through. So considering how we can optimize this, the first is clearly to prioritize user-initiated actions. This is a cron process. This is something we want to do to make sure that we're showing the right products, but we don't want it to, or a user-initiated action to get lost in the weeds of all of that going on. So the first thing that I did was actually have a priority. So we have multiple queues in our Laravel app. In this app, it's just high and low. So high priority items get stuck on the high queue, and low priority items on the low queue. Now, if it's a user-initiated action, I clearly want it to be on the high queue rather than the default, which is low. What I also want to do is this merchandise category job actually triggers, all of those other jobs. So I use Laravel batches and jobs that run on completion. And so there's quite a chain of tasks that then occur. So I also pass in a priority because just because the first job runs on the high priority queue, any further scheduled jobs or dispatched jobs don't get put on that high queue. So I actually pass the priority all the way down, so I know, is this something that we need to be treating differently? So that's the first step. So then we know that even if there's a half an hour, set of processes running, our job will be towards the top, and so that customer action will see the result of their action quickly. Now, I don't want to just kind of solve it kind of one way. This is a good time to reflect on my approach. So what other things could I do in order to kind of minimize this problem? Now, the firstly is I've got a dyno. I think I've moved from having a 1x dyno to a 2x dyno, just kind of so I've got more RAM and I can run more worker processes. But that's very static. I would like it to be the case that if the queue gets longer, I increase the number of dynos temporarily, get through the queue, and then scale them back down again. So got put onto Hirefire, which is an app for Heroku, which does just this. All you need to do, and for my particular case for job queues and workers, is add a controller that will provide information on the number of jobs in the queue. So very, very simple controller. And I think this one is my very simple controller. I have the Hirefire API token. I kind of loop through all my queues, count how many in there, and provide it back to Hirefire. Now, can then see at 10 o'clock when my schedule ran, it actually scaled up to 4 dynos because there was 316 jobs in the queue, got through them, and as that decreased the number of dynos. And because you're only charged sort of pro rata for dynos, this is a much better way of doing it than always having 3 or 4 dynos running. So that's a step better. I now know I can scale if there's, suddenly an influx, and no matter how big category merchandiser gets and how many categories it manages, this approach will continue to scale. I'll just need to kind of manage how many dynos I want to go up to in the worst case scenario. So that's 2 steps. I've prioritized user initiated actions, and I've made sure that we can scale if we spot there's a lot of jobs in the queue. And the final one is kind of just like avoid do myself a favor and not scheduling everything at once. So spread the work to minimize those spikes. Those things that run on a schedule, I really don't have to kind of schedule a merchandising process for every store, for every category, all at the same time. It's just kind of inviting problems. And so a very simple way I kind of worked around that is, rather than running this like merchandise job, twice a day, I run it every hour, and on that hour, I just look at the store ID in the database, modulo 12, match it with the current hour. So we're spreading those jobs still twice a day, but we're spreading them across the day. Now, there's still events that trigger these, a category merchandising event process. But this is our kind of fallback. We want to kind of do it regularly to make sure we've got the latest data. And this ultimately has produced logs which are far shorter now. So if I show you New Relic for, say, the last 6 hours, you'll see that the spikes are far shorter. So there are events that ran at 9 and they only last a few minutes. If I go back to the previous 6 hours, we can see there was quite a lot going on at 2 o'clock, but it only lasted a few minutes. And similarly, if I go back again, I think there's a couple at 10 o'clock, which go on for 5 minutes. So, rather than having a half an hour time period where we have a lot of jobs in the queue, that is much shorter now because we're spreading it out through the day. So those 3 areas where I've kind of tackled an issue from a customer support perspective to make sure my app is a little bit more efficient.